Are there ghosts watching this show right now? I hope so. And fortunately, I have a friend that can answer that question for me. Welcome to Stoughton Writers Group on TV. I'm Mike Hardman, your founder and author of Hardman, a Memoir. And today I'm going to have a man fresh off of his morning show at WBSM in New Bedford in the South Coast, one of the voices of the South Coast, who provides a great service there. He's also an author, and I guess the best way to describe him is a man about town. Welcome, Tim Weisberg, to the show, Tim, and thank you for coming on. When I started this, you were one of the guests I wanted to have on right away because of my interest in ghosts. So I welcome you. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. First question I have to ask is, where we tape this in Stoughton, you're in the New Bedford area. Is there really a higher concentration of ghosts in this area, or am I dreaming about that?
No, there is. I mean, you're in the heart of what's called the Bridgewater Triangle. Mm-hmm. It was a term that was coined by Loren Coleman, cryptozoologist, back in the 1970s. He first wrote about it in his 1983 book, Mysterious America. And one of the biggest stories of that book and of the Bridgewater Triangle happened right in Stoughton. That would be the Thunderbird sighting that happened.
Explain that a little bit more. I've never heard of the Thunderbird sighting.
So there's apparently there's a road called Bird Hill out there. And so this giant bird was seen standing there in the road the size of a man and then took off into the sky.
Oh my God. That would have been shocked. Might
have been random now that I think about it. But
yeah,
but it does the Stoughton, Brockton, Weymouth, Abington, all of these different points of, all within a stone's throw of each other, all within, maybe 20 miles of each other, are all highly concentrated areas of paranormal activity.
Why then? What's it about us? Are we just so great that they don't want to leave us, or they just like it here? Or
that's the big question. So one of the things that we've investigated over the years is the connections between the Bridgewater Triangle and King Philip's War. So King Philip's War happened in the late 1600s. It was the bloodiest war per capita ever fought on American soil. A higher percentage of people living here died in that war than died in the Civil War. And so obviously that leaves an imprint on the land. So the question is, did that cause a lot of the hauntings that we encounter with the Bridgewater Triangle? But I actually think that was more of a symptom of the triangle than it was a cause. I think that the Bridgewater Triangle is this like living, breathing thing that just keeps feeding off the energy that we feed into it by talking about it, by investigating it, by even having these experiences. So it becomes kind of a self-perpetuating cycle.
So this is a weird question, but are they listening to us when you say that? Are they feeling us? Or
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything we do, you got to think, we never really have any privacy if ghosts are around us, right? They can see everything. They can hear everything. So, but whatever this essence is that is behind the triangle, I think that it not only knows what we say, what we do, but I think it actually has influence over what we say and what we do. That's why this area had the highest rate of criminal mental illness. Because I think that the triangle kind of works its way into people's psyches.
How's that happen? What are we thinking about all the time? Are they inside our heads? Are they influencing it, or is this something we think?
I think what it is it's just that it could be a variety of different things. Environmental factors that can be caused by this. It can be kind of just some of the, the vibrations that happen. People always say, oh, I only send out good vibes. Well, in the Bridgewater Triangle, there's a lot of negative vibes that people pick up too. So I think what happens is you're getting hit from all these different directions from these tentacles of the triangle that eventually it's just going to wrap itself around you one way or the other.
So should people move? You
can peacefully coexist with it. You just have to be aware of it. So like, I don't fear it, but I'm aware of it. So I know sometimes if I start to get a little bit depressed or down in the dumps or everything, I say, well, is it me? Is it things that are going on in my life? Or maybe do I just need to stop going out and investigating for a little while, take a step back and get into a better headspace first?
How intense is doing the investigations? Like when you write the books and you have a radio show about it and you're on TV, you're everywhere. It's in your life constantly. How intense is that feeling that they're around them?
You get used to it. So it's almost like, if you know that there's a surveillance camera at work, you're a little unnerved by it at first because you're not used to being surveilled all the time. But then you start to realize, well, wait a minute, I don't really do anything that would cause anybody to be upset about this. So you eventually just know that it's there and you deal with it, and it just becomes part of the background. And I think that happens with a lot of this activity is that it's there, you learn how to interact with it, and then it becomes something where it's not that you ever become used to it per se, because it's going to make its way known in different ways, but you eventually just deal with it and say, well, I guess we just live here together.
How did somebody be like ghosts? Why are some people ghosts and some people aren't when they die?
I think that there's a couple of different explanations or definitions of what a ghost is. So not every ghost that we encounter, I think, is the spirit of a dead person. But let's just start with that definition, the idea that it's a departed soul. And if that's the case, why would some people stick around? Well, you'll hear people that will tell you that they might have unfinished business, or that they're here for a specific purpose. They're trying to tell you something. I don't think that's the case. I think ghosts can just kind of come and go as they want. So they can be here if they want to be. They don't have to be if they don't want to be. And they could actually be in multiple places at once if they want. So that covers kind of that definition. But I think a lot of the ghosts that we encounter, especially in the Bridgewater Triangle area, are ghosts that we actually create with our own minds. The idea of what the Tibetans called tulpas, or what we call thought forms or egregores, that the more we put out the energy that a place might be haunted, we're actually creating that haunting with our minds. And I don't mean creating it in our minds. I mean, our minds are actually able to manipulate the environment around us. They say, we use 10% of our brain, and what could that other 90% do? I think it could be that when we're all sitting in a room in the dark and we say, if there's somebody here, can you slam that door across the room? And then the door slams. I think it's just as likely that everybody in that room's collective consciousness and focus made that door slam than it is that there's the spirit of a dead person that did it.
We've known each other for many moons, and what you convinced me was your story about Lizzie Borden. I mean, I wasn't a believer, but I'm fascinated by you, so I wanted to ask you questions, but I wasn't a believer. But can you tell that story, how you make that situation happen?
Yeah, so I mean, I've investigated the Lizzie Borden house dozens of times over the years, and the very first time that I went there, I walked away saying, this place isn't haunted. It's it's just gimmick. And then the second time I went back, we actually did a more intensive investigation and a little bit more of a private investigation. And that night really kind of changed my life as an investigator and as a person, because I actually had something lift my legs up off a bed. I was laying on the side of the bed, and I felt this energy come over me. And I said, and I actually had friends there with the equipment that came over and checked it out and said, yes, you are getting an electromagnetic spike over your body. There is some energy over you. It is colder over your body, which, you'd think my laying on the bed, my body heat would be rising. So there was all this correlation data to there being possibly something there manifesting. And I said, well, if you're here, can you shake the bed? Can you knock on the wall? Can you lift my legs up? And when I said that, I felt two hands wrap around my ankles, and then it picked my legs up and held them out over the side of the bed. And for about, 15, 20 minutes, my legs are just sitting out there. And I'm not, it just feels to me like somebody's holding my legs. And then after a while, it dissipated. And then I got up and I said, okay, now somebody else do it, because I don't want to be the only one that had this experience, because otherwise it could just be in my mind. And other people went down that night and had it happen, and other people have had it happen in the years since. So that's when I knew that there was something there to that house. And then it just progressed over the years. It scratched me. It choked me. It threw me up the stairs. It threw me down the stairs. It growled at me. It swore at me. But probably the creepiest one was when I was standing in the spot where Mrs. Borden her body was found. And there was a psychic in the room with us. She was the house psychic at the time, and she was getting attacked by something she couldn't see. At least that's what she was telling us. So we're over there looking at her, and it's summertime, she's wearing a tank top, and we can see these scratches and these welts appearing on her shoulders. And I said, well, don't pick on her, pick on somebody your own size. I won't even fight back. And I put my hands behind my head, and I felt two hands grab my elbows and start pushing me back. And so then I pushed it, and then it pushed me, and then I pushed it, and then it pushed me, kind of wrestling a little bit. And when I said, oh, is that all you can do? And right after I said that, just wham, it threw me up against the wall. And that's when I realized, okay, like this thing can do what it wants, and I've got to kind of be respectful of that.
But you're a journalist, and you're trained to be skeptic. So how did you make the leap from one to the other? I mean, we're trained that way. So
I realize there's kind of two ways to look at this when I'm on these investigations. One is to be objective and to be the reporter and to just put on that cap and try and look at it from that objective perspective. And then the other part is sometimes you got to go a little gonzo. You got to be a little Hunter S. Thompson in the moment and realize that if you take yourself too far out of the experience might not happen. So it's not meant to necessarily be something that's coldly observed. and just document it. It needs to be experienced. And part of my idea of what a ghost is, no matter what the cause is, the way that it's able to manifest to us, it's not physical per se. It's not, you're going to be able to go in there and always get these temperature changes or EMF spikes or other things that we measure to see if there's a ghost there. I think that a ghost is just emotion. And so the same way I can't go into a room and measure love or measure hate or measure jealousy or anything else, maybe I can't measure a ghost because it's that energetic kind of emotional imprint on a space. And so that's why I think you've got to have an experience. So I kind of use the joke, if a ghost haunts and nobody's there to experience it, does it haunt at all? And I really don't think so. I think, and people say, well, what about when they put a ring camera up somewhere and that catches it? There's nobody else around. Well, the very act of having that ring camera there is observation. So it knows that something is going to see it at some point. Therefore, it manifests and interacts.
What do you feel like when you go into a place you haven't been before? Do you think there's ghost activity? What's the feeling like?
So it all depends. Kind of, first of all, when I go into a lot of these places, they're historic. So first and foremost, like the history nerd in me is geeking out over all the different stuff that's there. And when I first started going into these things, I always said, I'm as psychic as a brick. So I'm not going to pick up anything. I'm not going to feel anything. But over time, I've realized that as I go into these places, you can kind of feel that energy. So you can walk into a place and say, oh, I think something might happen here tonight. Or you might walk into a place and you might say, oh, this is going to be a slog trying to get anything to happen tonight. So you just kind of get that sense. But to me, that's no different than somebody who, I'm a bowler. So when I go to the bowling alley and I'm doing practice before the league games start, I throw those first couple of balls and I say, yeah, I don't think I'm going to have it tonight. And that's kind of just the same idea. I don't think that it's anything necessarily psychic, but you just kind of vibe on it and you get that feeling.
Your book goes to the South Coast. You write about ghosts. My book, Hardman and Memoir, I write about a near-death experience. And both of them we're different, but we fall in the same category that we're proving to people something happened. How do you prove that ghosts? What do people ask you about your book and about ghosts being real? What's like the number one question you get?
I mean, that's the way that I always try to handle it, is to not necessarily say to them, I can't convince you that ghosts are real. What I can do is I can convince you that the experiences that I've had or that other people have had and told me are real experiences, and that they're not imagining it, and that this is something that really did happen to them. That's kind of step one. If you can win that, then you can have that further conversation as to what might have caused it. The next step from there is you've got to say, well, you got to get to the trust that you eliminated all the possible real causes of what it could be, all the mundane explanations and non-paranormal. And then if you can keep going down that path, then they start to go with you down that logical step to say, okay, well, if it is something unexplained, then maybe this idea of a ghost is possible. So I always say there's really two ways to convince people if they're not believers. One is convince them that you are sane and that, they can trust what it is that you're saying. And the other thing, just bring them out there and have them have their own experience. And I've seen people who are hardened skeptic to the point that I would actually call them cynics, go into an investigation with us and then walk away being the biggest true believer out of the entire group.
Do you get a look? I get a look when I talk about it, like I'm selling it or to people. I get like people back off. And then I have to put on the charm and do the hard sales pitch about the book, buying the book, because like your subject, we don't want to talk about death, but we also don't want to talk about ghosts either. And we don't want, because we can't figure out whether it's real or not. Do you think that's the case? Because we can't prove it, but we know it.
Well, see, human beings we both love a mystery and we hate a mystery. We love to be able to explore things and try to solve them, but we hate not finding the answer. And so for us, the question of life after death is one that we can't solve. So then it becomes more comforting for people to be able to say, well, it's not real, because it's easier to say that because there's no proof otherwise. Whereas to prove that there is, it requires a lot more to be able to convince people. So I think, like for me, I'm going to be honest with you, I was a skeptic about near-death experiences. I was a skeptic about the idea. I was like, of course they see this light at the end of the tunnel, and then they see that's just the light of when they're sitting there on the bed having surgery and all this stuff. Like, I tried to rationalize it in my mind as all the different ways that I could. And then I started talking to people that actually have those experiences, and I realized, like, wait a minute, this is more than that. When I talk to people who, some have that brief experience, but then others have ones that last in their mind days or months or weeks. I talked to one woman who went to an entirely different plane of existence and learned all about it, but then came back in the blink of an eye and recalled everything when she came back. I mean, that's not a dream. That's not imagining something. That's somebody who had months worth of experiences in the blink of an eye. How does that happen? They had to have gone somewhere.
Like I tell people, when it got to the point where I thought I was going to die, I did see the light, and I understand what people think about the light, but I felt the warmth too. And then I felt people behind the wall laughing and joking and dogs barking, and it was a happy experience. I don't know whether they're ghosts or just the people living in my mind in heaven. What do you think the answer to that is?
I would think in that situation, what that is wherever we go or whatever we become, that's what those people were. And so they're kind of welcoming you into that plane of existence. That could be, I'm not a religious person, but I don't discredit or discount the belief in heaven if people want to believe in that, because I do think it's possible that that describes, rather than being a place physically in the clouds, it describes that other state of consciousness that we all go to after this. Here's the biggest thing that you have to understand with all of this is we try to put physical science on something that's not physical, and not everything has to be explained empirically. So for these types of experiences, I like to look at consciousness not as being the byproduct of a physical brain with synapses firing and all of that, but I look at it more as the network that we are all on. So I describe us as computers. So we are all just computers that can be individual workstations that can run all the individual programs it needs to do, but then we also can connect to the internet. And so this greater consciousness that we all experience is that internet. And just because our machine dies, just because our computer, fries itself or, the batteries run out on it, it doesn't mean that all that stuff that's out there in the internet ceases to exist. We just can't access it through that terminal anymore. But everything that made us up is not within that machine. We've put it on the cloud. And that's why I love the fact that we actually call it the cloud, because maybe that is what heaven is. It's the idea of this greater network connecting us all. That's why we can download all this stuff. So when people say, well, what about reincarnation? Do you believe in that? I don't know. But what I do think is I think it's possible that those personalities that exist in that network can be downloaded into a new machine. So you can have the program, the information that was a World War II fighter pilot that gets downloaded into the body of a 9-year-old kid, living in Massachusetts.
That's fascinating. I want to ask you a question about Halloween, because we tape this during Halloween season. And this is a strange question. I don't know why I thought of it, but mine works weird. Journalists' mind work crazy. You know that. I was thinking, do ghosts like Halloween? Do you think? So
I think where it comes into play for, at least in terms of paranormal activity. So the idea is that this day is a celebration and a recognition of the dead, right? That's what we're celebrating. And so when we're doing that, we are telling them, hey, it's okay. And maybe for that one day, people who normally don't want anything to do with ghosts might be a little bit more willing to believe in it. So you're opening that door to them. So while I think they're always around, I think that's kind of like, inviting them in. Like, for example, I don't like to have anybody over my house. I like it to be my private sanctuary. But if I'm having a party, then sure, everybody's invited. Come on over. And I think Halloween is kind of that party where they all feel like they're invited to come over when normally we might not want to let them in.
Does it help us kind of rationalize that ghosts are with us, Halloween, do you think? In a way in our minds that, they're here?
I think it does. I think it, if you can open your mind up to the possibility that these things can be there, and you take it beyond Halloween, because we want to be freaked out on Halloween. We love being freaked out. That's what we watch the horror movies for, and that's why we go to the haunted attractions and all that. But if we take that part out of it, if we take the thrill of the chill out of it, then what we find is that it's actually a human connection more than anything. So I think there's no more greater proof of human beings, being part of a greater good and being part of a greater love than to say that we can interact with each other even when the physical body's dead. And if that's the case, then I don't know why it would be anything to be afraid of. We only fear it because we fear the unknown. That's the strongest type of fear that we have is fear of the unknown. And even more so, there's something called anticipatory fear. So it's not just about the fear of what we don't know. It's about the fear of what could happen from what we don't know, because we are naturally accustomed to try to protect ourselves against all threats. And one of the greatest quotes I ever got from somebody, a psychotherapist, told me that the worst ghost you can imagine is always going to be worse than the worst ghost that you actually can encounter. And if you just go into that mindset and think, no matter what I am dealing with here, it can't be as bad as I built it up to be in my mind, then I don't want to say it's a disappointment when they can't do all the things you're afraid of, but it's a little bit more reassuring.
I was listening to your show this morning, and WBSM is one of the last places where people really get local news. And our colleague Chris McCarthy came on, and Chris had well-documented battle with COVID and almost died. And he said something that I say every day: it's Monday, but it's a great day. And I think in my case, and I think Chris, I speak with Chris on this, because what he talks about is that knowing what's happening to you is a great comfort and relief. Kind of your life changes. I'm not worried about stuff. I don't worry if I get stopped at a stop sign. I don't swear as much at objects, things like that. And I think Chris has always been kind of intense guy on the radio because he battles with people, but he's calm now too. And I don't know why we're afraid of that, why that fear we're afraid of, and why we're afraid of people around us, ghosts around us, giving us energy or whatever they're doing. I don't know why we're afraid of the unknown so much, because there's so much evidence that it isn't bad.
But some people have had experiences that are bad. So I worked on a show called Ghost Stalkers. It was the first TV show that I worked on as a writer and researcher. And that was a show about two people that one had a near-death experience and one had a death experience. And they were then kind of trying to chase the answers as to what happened to them. And the person who had the death experience, John Tenney, who's become one of my favorite people in the world, he actually died when he was, I think, 16. He had a heart attack. He had an undiagnosed heart condition. He died. And when he died, before they brought him back, he went to like a black void. And he said it was just so cold and devoid of any feeling. And that's what bothered him the most about it, was the absence of light, the absence of love. And so he was like a 16-year-old punk rock kid, thought he knew better than everybody. And he came back changed from that experience in a different way. So I almost think that, the experience that you have when you get into one of those situations it's the right experience to change who you are. If he had gone into a place that was, love and light and everything, all his loved ones were around him, he might have felt like, hey, look at how I've been so far in my life, and this is still where I'm going. But I think if you see a darkness and a void, and that's the word that he uses more than anything to describe it as a void, if you realize that that's what could wait for you on the other side, that might change you. So I think it's all kind of a personal way of, they say that when we die, we get a review of our life. I don't know if we even need to have a review of our life. I think just the feeling of not having that life becomes that review.
Well, I definitely had a review of my life. If people flash in front of me, it was like watching a movie. But I know the void part in between, it was cold and dark. And I remember thinking to myself, in my mind is this it? You get that feeling. What was I told? Is this it? I think maybe that's the experience of it too. This is fascinating, but I really want to ask you about writing, because this is a writing show. And I'm fascinated about the process of writing. You communicate on so many different platforms. You write for TV or radio. You're a newspaper writer. You do a lot of things. When you sat down to write a book, how'd you put all that together to develop a different skill?
For me, it was a little daunting at first, because I was like, well, I've never written a book, a cohesive thing for that long. And then I actually mentioned to one of my newspaper editors at the time, I said, I don't know if I can write a whole, 35, 40,000 word book. And he said to me, he goes, I've edited your articles. You write 35, 40,000 word articles before I, take a hatchet to them. So that kind of freed me up a little bit to realize, just write. And I was very fortunate that the publisher that I worked for, History Press, they gave me a word count, but they weren't really involved. So I got to kind of just do my own thing and work through that process on my own. The second book that I wrote, I actually had an editor that was looking for more frequent updates and everything. And I kind of unfortunately went into book writing the same way I went into journalism. The reason why I got into journalism and became, I think, successful at it is because I could write on a deadline more than anything. I don't think anything else matters. The fact that I can turn in clean copy with 10 minutes to go before publication. I think that's what kept me working all those years. And so I kind of took that mentality into writing a book. I signed a contract where they were going to give me a year to write the book. And I said, I don't need a year. I'll have it done in 6 months. And we'll get it out in time for next Halloween. And so they said, are you sure? I said, I'm sure. Okay. And so then it got to the point where I had 2 weeks left before the deadline. And that's when I actually started writing the book. I had to feel that pressure of being on deadline to be able to get it done. And then I just did my thing. I'm not a draft writer. I'm never going to write multiple drafts. I'm just going to spell it all out. And then hopefully what I spell out on the page is good enough.
I'm biased this way here. but I think sports writers make the best novelists and writers.
You definitely have to be somebody who can describe the action. Not so much anymore, but the old school sports writers, the ones who actually describe the game. Now it's more about the story within the game. So it's more about telling the story of, the kid whose birthday it was when he scored 4 touchdowns or whatever it is. But those of us who came up when I was, and we were still writing what they call gamers, you had to really describe it to people to be there. And when I became a sports writer, I was not a sports fan, really. I liked football, I liked basketball, and I didn't know about anything else. And I've covered hockey, girls field hockey, tennis, things that I would never have covered in my life and never would have watched. And when I said to the editor, I said, I don't know anything about this sport. And he said, no, but you know how to write what you see. So just go do that and you'll be fine. If you don't know the technical terms or anything like that, that's fine. We can help you with that end of it. But you can go there and just report on what you see. And as long as you do that, you'll never go wrong.
I think like yourself, like writing on deadline and having the pressure of them. I've gotten jobs, I've worked at the Globe where they gave you, 20 minutes after a game to write a story, so you focus in and you focus in on that. Do you do that when you sit down and write? Do you just get in that mode?
I do. I try to. I mean, I have to write 2 articles every day for my job here. And so I try to set aside a certain time where I'm going to say, this is when I can write. Now I'm looking for ideas all day long, but I try to make sure, outside of a news story, obviously a news story is a breaking story. I'm going to cover that right away. But if I'm writing a different article, then I'm going to try to find, because I try to have a mixture, because I don't want to just do hard news all the time. It drags you down, really. And so when I'm working on these other pieces, I'm trying to find that window of time. And then I was always worried that I wouldn't be serving the story correctly by trying to squeeze it into that window that I created. But instead, it actually worked the other way around. It made me focus only on the story, as opposed to, as someone who gets distracted and might have a little bit of ADD sometimes, I would be doing this, doing that, getting up, going over there. And now I've forced myself into focusing in on the story and getting it done. So that's really kind of, I think, helped me with that. What I love about deadline writing is it's a competition with yourself. So what's the best thing you can turn out in the amount of time that you're given? And I don't think that I was ever really competitive. I like competition, but I was never really competitive as a reporter because, I'm the only one going to cover that game usually. No, they're not sending 12 reporters from 12 different newspapers to go cover, old Rochester girls field hockey. So in order to kind of, make myself get better, it was me against the clock, as opposed to me against, comparing the way I told the story compared to how somebody else did.
This show is going really great, but I have to wrap it up. Tim, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about Ghost and your books. And your book's available a lot of places, so get Ghost of SouthCoast. I also want to thank the crew at Smack for putting the show on. We're getting out there, and I really appreciate all the work they do. And it was good. Tim, you were one of the first people I wanted to have on, and mission accomplished. Thank you for your day, and I appreciate it, Tim.
Thank you for having me.